Hey everyone, welcome back to the 443 Security Simplified. I'm your host, Mark the Liberty, and joining me today is
Corey, no more Pepe the Frog Knockreiner.
Corey's favorite website was taken down.
Bleh.
On today's episode, we will discuss how and potentially why 4chan was taken offline by a cyber attack. Before that, we'll have a bit of a chat about some chaos in the CVE program that all cybersecurity vendors rely on. And we will end with a quick update on a post-exploitation technique that's being used against Fortinet FortiGate devices. Man, with that, let's go ahead and post our way in. So, Corey, how do you feel about starting out with just a little bit of chaos?
Isn't that what life has been like the past few months anyways? So par for the course, my friend.
I feel like the last few months have been a lot of bit of chaos, but we'll at least have some chaos here. So on April 15th, MITRE sent out a letter to the board members on the CVE, the Common Vulnerability Enumeration Board, stating that their contract for managing the CVE program had not been renewed and was going to expire the following day on April 16th. So MITRE, they've been the CVE program secretariat and the root certified numbering authority since the program's inception in 1999.
I think people know, by the way, but CVE stands for the Cyber Vulnerability Enumeration
Common
or
Vulnerability
Common
Enumeration.
Vulnerability Enumeration. So it's what we use both for, like it's what we use to record in database vulnerabilities in all kinds of software products.
Yeah, it lets
We
us
being
have
the
like
entire industry.
a common number, hence the name, that all of us can use to talk about issues. So instead of saying, hey, did you hear about that recent Windows vulnerability? You can say, hey, did you hear about CVE 2017-1182 or whatever?
Yeah.
So MITRE, though, their role is that they maintain the CVE program's infrastructure. They provide like administrative support to the CVE board. The board is the one who's ultimately responsible for governing the program. But basically, when you go to cve.org, that's a MITRE-owned system that you're going to. When we, as a certified numbering authority at WatchGuard, reserve a CVE number and then publish the details later, we're publishing it to an API that is owned and maintained by MITRE. So they are a massive part of this entire process. And their participation is funded through a contract with CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, paid for by the U.S. federal government. So
just to mention, MITRE is a non-profit company. You might have said it before. It's not like a completely private organ. I mean, it's private, but it's non-profit. So it really is government funded in many, many ways.
Yeah, MITRE is this super weird company where they're technically a private company, but basically they're like a holding center for government contracts. Like, so if there's some government contract for something like tech related that doesn't have an existing home with like an existing private company, MITRE tends to be the one that holds it. Like, technically, Corey, wasn't DNS Watch originally developed as a MITRE contracted project back in the day?
Before
So
it was
a lot
acquired by Hexus, which was a KW holding company, which was also very government focused.
Yeah. So it wasn't DNS Watch, it was TDR, Threat Detection and Response, which is now ThreatSync in WatchGuard Cloud. But anyways, so like a lot of good tech is managed by MITRE, and in this case, a program that is just like a fundamental backbone piece of cybersecurity is managed by MITRE and funded by the US government. So it set off alarm bells across all security experts when this letter, after it had been received by the board, it was posted online pretty shortly after. And it freaked out the cybersecurity community because we didn't know what a immediate exit from MITRE would mean for the program. Like, worst case scenario could mean that the entire systems that manage the CVE program just go dark. Like if they're not being paid by MITRE or whatever, if they're required because the contract is down to be taken down, like it could have been a scenario where you go to cve.org and you get a does not exist message, which would have been pretty dang
Well,
serious.
we all have our own pages. Like if you go to pcert.watchguard.com, you'll find us list our vulnerabilities. I mean, those pages usually have CVE links as a good reference. That means all of the CVE links from every decent software vendor that pays attention to them would stop working.
Yeah, and it means that like even though we are a certified numbering authority, if the infrastructure's down, we have no way of reserving a CVE, publishing a CVE, updating the details. Like at a minimum, with MITRE off the map, they are the CNA of last resort. Meaning, if you as a researcher find a vulnerability in a piece of software, and that software vendor is not a certified numbering authority, which most smaller vendors are not, you go to MITRE to go get your CVE record to go publish it. And that would not be a possibility with it being taken down. So this could have been pretty damaging in how abrupt that it was coming about. But like the good news is, so in the 11th hour, CISA actually announced that they renewed the contract for 11 more months. But there's a few like interesting things that kind of came out of the woodwork during all of this chaos. So during the chaos, there's a group calling themselves the CVE Foundation. They registered the CVEfoundation.org that day and posted a anonymous message claiming that they were a coalition of active CVE board members working on transitioning the CVE program to a nonprofit foundation. But I got to be honest, like that smelled funny the first time I saw that page pop up of this like CVE Foundation coming out of nowhere. Their statement even said they'd been working on it for a while, but they're moving forward right now because of the chaos. But it felt like a bit of a fishy situation. But like, I don't know about you, Corey. Like, I think there actually is merit to moving the CVE program to a nonprofit. Like, let's look at the IETF, for example, the Internet Engineering Task Force. They're the ones responsible for developing and managing the standards for like everything we do on the internet, from cabling to internet protocols. They're technically a nonprofit funded by the private companies that use them. Think like Google, telcos, like all major tech companies put a bit of funding into IETF. Feels like for as chaotic as this was, so obviously ripping out the funding immediately is not the way to do this. But long term, I think it does actually make sense to turn the CVE program into
I
a
agree. I
nonprofit
mean, if you
foundation.
think about it, CVs are global too, and yet it's an American company kind of running it. So if you put your head in the perspective of another country, they all are using CVEs, and it was very detrimental to them as well. So having a nonprofit organization that's not related to a government seems like a smart way to keep this thing running. Same thing happens with DNS. You know, there was a time when, why can't I think of the name right now? My friend worked there. The folks that handle all the DNS registers, ICANN, they were largely US based for a while, but now they have a very big global community to keep it running because DNS is critical for the internet. I know CV might seem much smaller than that. It certainly mostly only affects the security community, but it really is a big deal. It's really a standard that's blown up that everyone from journalists to customers to vendors use to make sure products are secure. So when you have a government that can be in chaos, when administrations change and different priorities come up, whether you believe in them or not, I think that can be very detrimental to something that's global. So I agree. I think we need a foundation that can withstand different governments changing.
But having the contract doged overnight and trying to do that transition literally overnight is absolutely the worst possible
Horrible.
way of trying to do that. So even if the end result is something I actually agree with in this case, like holy crap, maybe a little bit of planning and thought should go into this.
We should get political, but I don't think anything Doge does is good. I don't think they really are out for fraud, waste, and abuse, and they seem to be making too many mistakes with their joyful chainsaw approach. Mistakes that are hurting a lot of industries and people, and frankly, the economy.
Yeah. Now, there's one other rabbit hole I want to go down. I got into a Reddit argument on one of the threads about
Oh
this.
no!
with someone that they basically claimed that like this is a good thing, like similar to what we just said, like this shouldn't be centralized under the U.S. government or effectively the control or the budget of the U.S. government, which again I agree with. Where they lost me though was claiming that MITRE was suppressing CVEs for backdoors and stuff intentionally inserted by the U.S. government. So
Huh.
the rabbit hole I want to go down is, does having like the U.S. federal government's funding in the CVE program, does that mean they can suppress CVEs? Like I'll tell you my hot take and what I got in the argument with from this less informed person. And like I feel like the cybersecurity community is one of the more transparent communities. And what I mean by that is if someone's doing something crappy, like researchers are going to find out and they're going to go public with it. We've seen it time and time again with plenty of vulnerabilities that have been discovered, things that look like they could have been intentionally inserted backdoors. I don't think that MITRE, even though they were funded through a government contract, has the power or the will to like suppress government inserted vulnerabilities and stuff just because they're the CNA of last resort.
I doubt it too. I will say, I'll start by saying I doubt it. I don't think that's likely. There are bad actors out there. I mean, we do know from our own leaks from Snowden that nation state government, state sponsored, cyber teams do sometimes stockpile 0 day that they don't disclose, but they usually work for the government when they find them. A MITRE, when someone is trying to use MITRE as a CNA, they're either the vendor that isn't a CNA themselves, or they're the researcher who found it. And in both cases, I think they're trying to report a vulnerability. They wanted to get out there. So if MITRE's like, no, we're not going to give you this, I'm sure they would still report the vulnerability and probably report that MITRE's not doing it. The only
100%.
like conspiracy theory tinfoil hat is we do know there's an underground and even state-sponsored vulnerability marketplace where people pay millions for roots, and companies like the NSO group that does not tell vendors. So I guess theoretically, if you want to wear a tinfoil hat, maybe someone at MITRE's like, okay, we'll pay you $2 million to shut up. I just don't think I don't think MITRE's the way that would happen. I think anytime you get that conspiratorial, you need to supply evidence. Conspiracies are a thing because they've happened occasionally in history, but they're not the norm. It's usually Occam's razor of the simplest solution is the most likely. I really doubt that MITRE had anything to do with that. I think the state-sponsored actors that are hiding vulnerabilities they have their own teams finding those, and they don't even try to report the CVE to a CNA at all in the first place. So
Yep.
I think it's a little silly. I do get why other countries are a little worried about American surveillance right now, though. So, I mean, I get it, but take your tinfoil hat off and go find some evidence first.
Yeah. But either way, I think like the goal of moving it out of the control of the federal, or at least the budget control, like we just proved we could cause chaos by canceling a
Yes.
contract. Like it absolutely
It's
should
not about
happen.
corruption. It's not about hiding vulnerabilities. It's about maintaining what has become a standard that goes far beyond the US borders and far beyond the government. This is something the entire industry relies on. We need it to be a public, reliable standard globally.
Yep. So I would like to see over the next 11 months of this renewed contract that they aim at the end of those 11 months that it's gets transitioned to a nonprofit organization. I know I am for sure going to be attending the next CNA meeting and voicing that if no one else does, which I'm sure everyone else at this point probably will. But that was a few hours of pure chaos and a bit of fear of what the heck's going to happen tomorrow that I could have done without. And I'm sure most of the cybersecurity community could have done without. Felt like an unforced error.
Agree. But I think there's a lot of those being happened with Dojin.
Unfortunately, yes. So moving on, as of this recording right now, the infamous image board 4chan is still currently down after a reported cyber attack. So last week, a user on a competing image board for a community that was actually banned from 4chan a few years ago for being too extreme for 4chan started
What
posting.
even exists that's too extreme for 4chan? That's scary alone, Mark.
Yeah, They started posting images of administrative interfaces and user data as proof that they had successfully compromised the 4chan website. Soon after that, the website was taken offline. As some of their evidence, they posted email addresses associated with moderators and janitors. Janitors on 4chan are moderators with a limited set of permissions, like only being able to delete a post, whereas full moderators can even view like IP addresses of posts. They even posted the entirety of the site's source code, basically all the PHP scripts that they're running it behind the scenes. I found this discussion. I did not share a link with you, Corey, because this is a discussion we would not be able to share on a screen share, because intermixed with it is a whole bunch of very inappropriate material that you might assume would be on a image board from a community that is banned from 4chan. But I got a copy of like the source code, the list of the moderators, and it seems legitimate. Some news publications independently reached out to a bunch of the emails and confirmed that they were janitors and or moderators on 4chan. So it looks like it was compromised. Buried in that, the attackers like description of this, they actually talked about what they did allegedly to hack.
By the way,
4chan.
before we go in that, Mark, should we pause for a second? I mean, you and I know what 4chan is, but I would actually hope that the average person doesn't. We're talking to a technical audience, but hopefully some of them may, but you shouldn't. But I just wanted to point out, like 4chan is an image board, forum. Things only last for 24 hours typically on this board, but it's known for some of the worst things on the internet. One of the reasons we need to know about it is because its own hacking sub, it also has a random sub. And way back in the 2000s, even, Anonymous and LulzSec were all over 4chan. A lot of these anonymous hacking groups, and even Anonymous itself, which is really, it's no specific group. It could be whoever takes up that banner at any time, but they would post their operations first on 4chan. It also has a very disgusting subculture where they post the worst pornography, gore. QAnon was born on 4chan. One of the things that blows me away about the right and their belief in QAnon being some government insider, literally a troll on 4chan talking about how they can trick the world into believing this crap, which, by the way, they predicted. Pepe the Frog, the meme that's now huge, very much associated with right-wing fascist trolls, born on 4chan. And tons of child pornography. If you're someone that's like, oh, child pornography is bad, well, guess what? QAnon was born on the board that had all that stuff. So people should know this is a super disgusting, horrible image board. I actually, other than the fact that good guys do lurk there occasionally to find, to track people or to figure out what's going on in certain hacker subcultures, I don't mind that it's gone, but just know what this board is. One of the reasons it's big in the cybersecurity community is mostly Legion, Anonymous, for LulzSec and stuff like that. But it really has a lot of racist and horribly hateful content, and yet it's what drives a lot of the current right-wing agenda.
Yep. And part of the reason I assume Anonymous got their name originally is posts by default on 4chan are anonymous. Your username shows up as anonymous. Moderators will typically have a named account, same with janitors. You can also, as a user, pay for a named account. They call it the 4chan Pass, lets you get past like CAPTCHA protections on some of the things. But for the most part, most of the posts are anonymous unless you've verified your email or signed up for a paid account.
It's changed a bit since its 2000 days. Other boards like 8chan have taken over. And by the way, there was a 2chan too. So this board has evolved from all kinds of others that had either more legitimate or later on more illegitimate content. But just know it's not, while some of the subject, the actual non-random categories, subs or whatever are okay maybe, it really is mostly a gross place to hang out on the internet.
I guess before we get into how they claim they attacked it, they said that they do have access. Obviously, they posted all the email addresses associated with every moderator. They said that they had access to user data, but they are not going to leak it. They don't want to. They said that includes the paid users and accounts associated with the 4chan
I
Pass.
assume that's all they could get. I assume 90% of people or more on 4chan probably are anonymous. So
Yep.
other than maybe having things like IP tracking and stuff like that.
Yep. For those that verified their emails, they noted that 4chan hashed email addresses before saving them, so they don't have access to the raw emails, just a hash of the email. But like how they got in is kind of interesting. So you mentioned 4chan's an image board. Traditionally, it's you upload a picture of something, you can put some text with it as like a description, and that's how they have discussions on it. Some of the sub boards in there, for example, like the science one /SCI, let you upload more than just pictures. In fact, a few of them let you upload PDFs. The science one, notably, because maybe you're uploading like a research study for people to look at. In order to, when the user uploads that PDF, 4chan creates a thumbnail image of the PDF, and it uses a library called Ghostscript to do that. So you upload a PDF, Ghostscript on the website creates a thumbnail, and then shows that thumbnail on the post that gets created. So the attacker claims that the version of Ghostscript that 4chan was using is from 2012 and has not been updated since then, and contained a number of vulnerabilities. And that secondary, the site did not actually verify that what you uploaded was a valid PDF. And they found that they could upload a PostScript file instead, which Ghostscript, instead of creating a thumbnail, would actually interpret and execute the PostScript code with inside it. And that gave them at least access to the server under the context of the server user that's running it. They then found a set UID binary, basically a program running on the server designed to run as a root user. And they used that to elevate their privileges to root, which ultimately gave them access to the entire infrastructure. So again, this is from like it's what the attacker is claiming. There's no reason to believe they're incorrect, but that does track with something that is plausible. Like that's a common way for attackers to gain access to a public board like this is abusing file uploads and abusing file uploads that don't validate the content before parsing it into something.
It's extremely believable. I'm sure it actually is probably accurate. And I'm curious what this guy, typically we talk about threat actors who are very black hat doing criminal malicious things, espionage. I wonder who this person is. Like, it's still technically unauthorized access, so it's a hack, so it's a criminal act. But I wonder if this person is some sort of someone that believes they're hacking for good.
It based off of where it was posted and the comment thread that follow along with it, including their own participation in it, my gathering for it is that they are a member of this community that was banned from 4chan, and this was like a retribution, let's throw egg on their face kind of thing.
That's interesting.
Because they were celebrating it and as was everyone else on there, of basically F4chan kind of thing. So yeah, it's interesting. Like you said, Corey, I'm not sad to see 4chan offline. I don't think it is a great place, and humans that aren't disturbed probably shouldn't spend a lot of time on it, even if there are some like semi-legitimate channels on it that might have okay content. Like the site itself is tainted.
There's a lot of normal channels, and sometimes those channels have pretty clean content, but it's known for much worse things. I mean, one of the things we didn't point out is, was it the New Zealand, the shooter that shot a lot of people in a church, was he used 4chan to start that. It really breeds that kind of hate and anger, and it's not a good place. And I know this because following Anonymous and LulzSec there, it's not so, I feel bad for the intelligence agents that have to hang out in these forums with these people, because it must just deaden your soul.
Yeah, 100%. Either way, like it's still currently down. Maybe by the time we post this episode, it'll be back up. All signs point to this being a legitimate security incident, but there haven't been any communications from the owners or anyone from 4chan's administrative team.
I will give that it will probably survive. I mean, it's hosted bad content that the FBI has known about forever, but things like it's things only living for 24 hours. It's somehow been able to survive 20 years plus despite having pretty horrible stuff on it.
Yep, unfortunately. But we'll see if it's able to come back from this one. So let's move on to the last story then. So last week, Fortinet announced that they had discovered a post-exploitation technique against their FortiGate VPN devices that allowed attackers to maintain read-only access to the file system even after remediating the original vulnerabilities that the attackers used to gain access to the systems.
Pretty crazy statement. I know we're about to learn more, but think about that. A vulnerability allowed bad guys to get into your device. It was fixed, and yet bad guys are still in these devices.
Yep. So
That's
they
quite a
began
situation.
they started emailing their customers with a notification which they flagged as TLP, so traffic light protocol amber strict, which basically means do not share this with anyone. Naturally, it was posted on the internet very shortly after these started going out.
The funny thing is they're not a government. Like they can't enforce TLP strict on their customers. It's not like they're sending something to other government agencies.
Yeah, I mean, they could fire a customer, I suppose, if they really wanted to, like as an enforcement.
Yeah.
But it's not like you can, take them to court for breaking intelligence rules. But anyways, so they started emailing customers notification that attackers that had previously exploited a series of vulnerabilities from 2022 through 2024 may have maintained persistence by creating symbolic links to the language folder or in the language folder from the root file system on devices where the SSL VPN was enabled. Basically, symbolic link is a what's the right way to describe this?
It's like a
A
file that just points to another file. In
There you
Windows, if
go.
you're thinking of a graphical UI, a shortcut, it's not really the actual program, but what's sitting on your desktop is a shortcut pointing to an executable on some directory in your folder. In Linux or command line systems, Unix-like systems, a symbolic link is just a file shortcut to another executable somewhere else. So just
Perfect.
think about it like a CLI shortcut instead of a graphical shortcut.
So in this case, they made a shortcut to the root file system in a internet exposed or at least publicly accessible web location, which allows them to maintain read-only access to that file system through that publicly accessible SSL VPN page, even after the original vulnerability was remediated.
I'm trying to
Sticks
remember, were they
around
like the help files for SSL VPN or the
as the
language
language
files, I
files,
think?
yeah.
The language files. Yeah.
It sticks around even after rebooting and upgrading the FortiGate OS running on the device. Read-only access to the file system means the attacker could obviously access the configuration files, which includes credentials. So France's CERT, Cybersecurity Emergency Response Team or whatever, says that the technique is being used dating back to early 2023, exploiting vulnerabilities from 2022 through 2024. And then another stat, the Shadow Server Foundation stated that they found 16,000 or a bit over 16,000 internet exposed FortiGate devices that had been compromised by this symbolic link backdoor maintaining persistence. If you are a FortiGate customer, they released a antivirus and IPS update signature that detects and removes the symlink. Also, the latest firmware release has been updated to detect and remove the link when you upgrade that too. They put out a KB with some additional recommendations like restoring a config from a known good backup, resetting all credentials and all secrets that would be contained in the config. So admin credentials, local users, VPNs, like your pre-shared keys for Radius or IPsec, certificate private keys, basically anything that could be considered a secret on the device, rotate it if you were affected by this. But it's I guess like good news, read only and not read write. Like that could have been even worse, but this is a pretty devastating amount of access still left over
I mean, if
after the remediation.
read only still gives you the credentials to get right.
Fair.
But yeah, it could be worse. My main takeaway is just the fact that, we've had our own experience at WatchGuard hardware with persistent malware. These smart threat actors, I don't think we know who the threat actor is in these Fortinet cases, but I would hazard a guess that it could be state-sponsored. We know that China and Russia have both been doing state-sponsored attacks against various routing devices and network security devices, but they're learning the firmware, and they're learning the way firmware upgrades. For us, the persistence mechanism paid attention to upgrades and tried to reinfect, but they're paying attention to things like file systems, what lives through different kinds of updates, where they can put stuff that might survive even discovery of the actual threat. Um, and this is a new rabbit hole of making sure your software is secured, not just to being Trojans, but to finding every little place where they might have left something that could give them access back. So it really is a escalation, I think, of the cat and mouse war.
And it's tough because, like in this case, some of the vulnerabilities, they weren't just in like the management interface, they were in the mobile VPN interface, which by nature you have to leave
Have to
exposed in
allow.
some way.
Yeah.
Like that's the whole purpose of a remote access VPN. That's also why attackers are targeting these devices, because by nature they are
There's
exposed.
ways. I think the SSL VPN is especially vulnerable because because it's over SSL TLS. It has a web page to first log on to. I think that's why a lot of companies are looking at other VPN mechanisms that, yes, they'll still need a service listening that eventually gets an authentication, but at least depending on, they may not have to expose a web management page for the VPN service. So more on that in the future from us too. But yeah, SSL VPN is the one thing where you have a web page with remote authentication. Sure, you can add MFA and other things to it to secure it, but if there is a pre-authentication attack on that page or any of its elements like help or language or whatever, that's an issue.
Yeah. And to be clear, you absolutely should put MFA on that, because
Oh,
we're
for
also
sure.
seeing massive waves of authentication brute force attacks against these
That would
VPN
save you from
services.
brute forcing, and a lot of vulnerabilities will only work with authentication. So it's only the pre-authentication attacks that MFA won't help you with.
Yep. Well, if you are a Fortinet customer, make sure you check out their KB that they posted. You probably already got an email from them, and just follow any remediation guidance that is in there, just to be safe. But man, I am I'm not throwing stones in glass houses, because I know it's a matter of if, not when we get to deal with another one of these things, and I am dreading that day when there's another targeted attack
We're doing
that
our
we have to.
best to try to fix all the issues we can find, but there's always something. So we'll
Yep,
deal with it if it comes.
if it comes, that's fair. But either way, man, don't expose what you don't have to the internet. And if you've got a VPN, well, good luck. Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. If you have any questions on today's topics or suggestions for future episode topics, you can reach out to us on Blue Sky. I'm at itsmark.me, Corey's at Secadept. We're also both on 4chan at Anonymous.
At Anonymous. Another good joke. You're on a roll, Mark.
You can reach out to us on Twitter, though, at watchguard_technologies. I'm always looking for more recipes or pictures of beautiful landscapes, which
Did
I
you
think
say
is
Twitter?
Twitter? No, Instagram, not Twitter. You cannot find us on Twitter. That crap's been deleted.
I'm glad you called it Twitter, though.
Yeah, well,
That's
it's
better than the alternative.
correct. Anyways, thanks again for listening, and you will hear from at least one of us next week.